Okay, everyone, guess what? We're back because at the end of the last stream, someone sent a link that there has been yet another happening, another event in this whole thing. It looks like this person. That's not Firefox. That's not brown rice. Firefox, where did you go? Oh, Firefox is dead. That's why. Why? Why have you betrayed me, Firefox? Why are you not even showing up? There it is. Okay, whatever. So it looks like not this person, but this person. It looks like George Papadopoulos has been charged and pled guilty already in his role in something. I don't even know what it is yet. So let's take a look at his indictment that he already pled guilty to. Oh, by the way, I'm Leonard French, your favorite copyright attorney. And here is the indictment. This was filed on October 5th, but his guilty plea was not unsealed, and this document was not unsealed until today. Excuse me. This is the U.S. District Court for the District of Columbia. This is USA versus George Papadopoulos, and it is a criminal charge. Statement of the offense. Pursuant to Federal Rule of Criminal Procedure 11, the United States of America and the defendant, George Papadopoulos, stipulate and agree that the following facts are true and accurate. These facts do not constitute all of the facts known to the parties concerning the charged offense. They are being submitted to demonstrate that sufficient facts exist that the defendant committed the offense to which he is pleading guilty. Overview. The defendant, George Papadopoulos, who served as a foreign policy advisor for the presidential campaign of Donald Trump, the campaign, made material false statements and material omissions during an interview with the Federal Bureau of Investigation that took place on January 27, 2017. At the time of the interview, the FBI had an open investigation into the Russian government's efforts to interfere in the 2016 presidential election, including the nature of any links between individuals associated with the campaign and the Russian government, and whether there was any coordination between the campaign and Russia's efforts. The FBI opened and coordinated the investigation in Washington, D.C. Defendant Papadopoulos made the following material false statements and material omissions to the FBI. Defendant Papadopoulos claimed that his interactions with an overseas professor, who defendant Papadopoulos understood to have substantial connections to Russian government officials, occurred before defendant Papadopoulos became a foreign policy advisor to the campaign. Defendant Papadopoulos acknowledged that the professor had told him about the Russians possessing dirt on then-candidate Hillary Clinton in the form of thousands of emails, but stated multiple times that he learned that information prior to joining the campaign. In truth and in fact, however, defendant Papadopoulos learned he would be an advisor to the campaign in early March and met the professor on or about March 14, 2016. The professor only took interest in defendant Papadopoulos because of his status with the campaign, and the professor told defendant Papadopoulos about the thousands of emails on or about April 26, 2016, when defendant had been a foreign policy advisor for over a month. Defendant Papadopoulos further told the investigating agents that the professor was a nothing and just a guy talking up connections or something. In truth and in fact, however, defendant Papadopoulos understood that the professor had substantial connections to Russian government officials and had met with some of those officials in Moscow immediately prior to telling defendant about the thousands of emails, and over a period of months, defendant Papadopoulos repeatedly sought to use the professor's Russian connections in an effort to arrange a meeting between the campaign and Russian government officials. Defendant Papadopoulos claimed he met a certain female Russian national before he joined the campaign, and that their communications consisted of emails such as, "Hi, how are you?" In truth and in fact, however, Defendant Papadopoulos met the female Russian national on or about March 24th, 2016, after he had become an advisor to the campaign. He believed that she had connections to Russian government officials, and he sought to use her Russian connections over a period of months in an effort to arrange a meeting between the campaign and Russian government officials. And I just want to remind everybody to be reading this with the thought in the back of your head, this man pled guilty, and this is a stipulation, this is an agreement between the defendant and the U.S. attorney, the prosecuting special counsel, Robert Mueller, that the defendant is stipulating that these statements are true and that he is guilty of these offenses. Through his false statements and omissions, Defendant Papadopoulos impeded the FBI's ongoing investigation into the existence of any links or coordination between individuals associated with the campaign and the Russian government's efforts to interfere with the 2016 presidential election. Timeline. Papadopoulos's role in the campaign. In early 2016, Defendant Papadopoulos learned he would be a foreign policy advisor for the campaign. Defendant Papadopoulos was living in London, England at the time, based on a conversation that took place on or about March 6, 2016 with a supervisory campaign official, the campaign supervisor. Defendant Papadopoulos understood that a principal foreign policy focus of the campaign was an improved U.S. relationship with Russia. Papadopoulos' introduction to the professor and the female Russian national. On or about March 14, 2016, while traveling in Italy, defendant met an individual who was a professor based in London, the professor. Initially, the professor seemed uninterested in defendant. However, after defendant Papadopoulos informed the professor about his joining the campaign, the professor took great interest in defendant. Papadopoulos was interested in the professor because, among other reasons, the professor claimed to have substantial connections with Russian government officials, which defendant Papadopoulos thought could increase his importance as a policy advisor to the campaign. On or about March 21, 2016, the campaign told the Washington Post that defendant was one of 5 named policy advisors for the campaign. On or about March 24th, defendant met with the professor in London. The professor brought with him a female Russian national, the female Russian national, introduced to defendant Papadopoulos as a relative of Vladimir Putin, with connections to senior Russian government officials. Papadopoulos pursues his contacts with the professor and the female Russian national. Following his March 24, 2016 meeting with the professor and the female Russian national, defendant Papadopoulos emailed the campaign supervisor and several members of the campaign's foreign policy team and stated that he had just met with his good friend, the professor, who had introduced him to the female Russian national, described by defendant in the email as Putin's niece, and the Russian ambassador in London. Papadopoulos later learned that the female Russian national was not, in fact, a relative of President Putin. In addition, while defendant expected that the professor and the female Russian national would introduce him to the Russian ambassador in London, they never did. Defendant Papadopoulos stated that the topic of their discussion was to arrange a meeting between us and the Russian leadership to discuss U.S.-Russia ties under President Trump. The campaign supervisor responded that he would work it through the campaign, but that no commitments should be made. The campaign supervisor added, "Great work." On or about March 31, 2016, defendant Papadopoulos attended a national security meeting in Washington, D.C. with then-candidate Trump and other foreign policy advisors for the campaign. When defendant Papadopoulos introduced himself to the group, he stated in some ad substance that he had connections that could help arrange a meeting between then-candidate Trump and President Putin. After his trip to Washington, D.C., defendant Papadopoulos worked with the professor and the female Russian national to arrange a meeting between the campaign and the Russian government and took steps to advise the campaign of his progress. In early April 2016, defendant sent multiple emails to other members of the campaign's foreign policy team regarding his contacts with the Russians and his outreach to Russia. On or about April 10, 2016, defendant Papadopoulos emailed the female Russian national, who responded the next day on or about April 11th that she would be pleased, very pleased, to support your initiatives between our two countries. Defendant Papadopoulos then asked the female Russian national in an email, carbon copying the professor, about setting up a potential foreign policy trip to Russia. The professor responded to defendant Papadopoulos' email later that day, on or about April 11th. This has already been agreed. I am flying to Moscow on the 18th for a Valdai meeting among pleas, plus other meetings at the Duma. The Duma is a Russian government legislative assembly. The female Russian national responded, I have already alerted my personal links to our conversation and your request. As mentioned, we are all very excited by the possibility of a good relationship with Mr. Trump. The Russian Federation would love to welcome him once his candidature would be officially announced. The professor introduces Papadopoulos to a Russian national connected to the Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs. On or about April 18, 2016, the professor introduced defendant Papadopoulos over email to an individual in Moscow, the Russian MFA connection, Ministry of Foreign Affairs, who told defendant Papadopoulos that he had connections with the Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs. The MFA is the executive entity in Russia responsible for Russian foreign relations. Over the next several weeks, defendant Papadopoulos and the Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs connection had multiple conversations over Skype and email about setting the groundwork for a potential meeting between the campaign and Russian government officials. On or about April 22, 2016, the Russian MFA connection sent defendant Papadopoulos an email thanking him for an extensive talk and proposing to meet in London or in Moscow. Defendant Papadopoulos replied by suggesting that we set one up here in London with the ambassador as well to discuss a process moving forward. On or about April 25, 2016, defendant Papadopoulos emailed a senior policy advisor for the campaign, the senior policy advisor. The Russian government has an open invitation by Putin for Mr. Trump to meet him when he is ready. The advantage of being in London is that these governments tend to speak a bit more openly in neutral cities. Papadopoulos learns that the Russians have dirt on Clinton. On or about April 26, 2016, defendant Papadopoulos met the professor for breakfast at a London hotel. During this meeting, the professor told defendant Papadopoulos that he had just returned from a trip to Moscow where he had met with high-level Russian government officials. The professor told defendant Papadopoulos that on the trip he, the professor, learned that the Russians had obtained dirt on then-candidate Clinton. The professor told defendant Papadopoulos, as he later described to the FBI, that they, the Russians, have dirt on her. The Russians had emails on Clinton, and they have thousands of emails. Following that conversation, defendant Papadopoulos continued to correspond with campaign officials and continued to communicate with the professor and the Russian MFA connection in an effort to arrange a meeting between the campaign and the Russian government. For example, the day after his meeting at the hotel with the professor, on or about April 27th, defendant Papadopoulos emailed the senior policy advisor, "Have some interesting messages coming in from Moscow about a trip when the time is right." Also, on or about April 27, 2016, defendant Papadopoulos emailed a high-ranking official of the campaign, the high-ranking campaign official, to discuss Russia's interest in hosting Mr. Trump. Having been receiving a lot of calls over the past month about Putin, wanting to host him and the team when the time is right. On or about April 30th, 2016, defendant Papadopoulos thanked the professor for his critical help in arranging a meeting between the campaign and the Russian government, and remarked, "It's history-making if it happens." Papadopoulos shares information from the Russian MFA connection. On or about May 4th, 2016, the Russian MFA connection sent an email, the May 4th MFA email, to Papadopoulos and the professor that said, "I have just talked to my colleagues from the MFA. They are open for cooperation. One of the options is to make a meeting for you at the North America desk if you are in Moscow." Defendant Papadopoulos responded that he was glad the Ministry of Foreign Affairs was interested. Defendant forwarded the email to the high-ranking campaign official, adding, "What do you think? Is this something we want to move forward with?" The next day, on or about May 5th, 2016, defendant Papadopoulos had a phone call with the campaign supervisor and then forwarded the email to him, adding to the top of the email, "Russia updates." On or about May 13th, 2016, the professor emailed defendant Papadopoulos with an update of what they had discussed in their recent conversations, including, "We will continue to liaise through you with the Russian counterparts in terms of what is needed for a high-level meeting with Mr. Trump and the Russian Federation." The next day, on or about May 14th, 2016, defendant Papadopoulos emailed the high-ranking campaign official and stated that the Russian government has also relayed to me that they are interested in hosting Mr. Trump. On or about May 21st, 2016, defendant Papadopoulos emailed another high-ranking campaign official with the subject line, "Request from Russia to meet Mr. Trump." The email included the May 4th MFA email and added, "Russia has been eager to meet with Mr. Trump for quite some time and have been reaching out to me to discuss." The government notes that the official forwarded defendant Papadopoulos' email to another campaign official, without including defendant Papadopoulos, and stated, "Let's discuss. We need someone to communicate that DT is not doing these trips. It should be someone low-level in the campaign so as to not send any signal." On or about June 1st, 2016, defendant Papadopoulos emailed the high-ranking campaign official and asked about Russia. The high-ranking campaign official referred him to the campaign supervisor because he is running point. Defendant Papadopoulos then emailed the campaign supervisor with the subject line, "Messages from Russia." "I have the Russian MFA asking me if Mr. Trump is interested in visiting Russia at some point. Wanted to pass this along to you for you to decide what's best to do with it and what message I should send or ignore." From mid-June through mid-August 2016, Papadopoulos pursued an off-the-record meeting between one or more campaign representatives and members of President Putin's office and the MFA. For example, on or about June 19th, 2016, after several email and Skype exchanges with the Russian MFA connection, defendant Papadopoulos emailed the high-ranking campaign official with the subject line, "New message from Russia." The Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs messaged and said that if Mr. Trump is unable to make it to Russia, if a campaign rep, me or someone else, can make it for the meetings, I am willing to make the trip off the record if it's in the interest of Mr. Trump and the campaign to meet specific people. After several weeks of further communications regarding a potential off-the-record meeting with Russian officials, on or about August 15th, 2016, the campaign supervisor told defendant Papadopoulos that, quote, "I would encourage you and other foreign policy advisors to the campaign to make the trip if it is feasible." The trip proposed by defendant did not take place. The defendant's false statements to the FBI. On or about January 27, 2017, defendant Papadopoulos agreed to be interviewed by agents from the FBI. The agents informed defendant Papadopoulos that the FBI was investigating interference by the Russian government in the 2016 presidential election and whether any individuals related to the campaign were involved. The agents further informed defendant Papadopoulos that he needed to be truthful and warned that he could get in trouble if he lied. The agents also advised him that lying to them is a federal offense. They confirmed that the interview was completely voluntary. During the course of the interview, defendant Papadopoulos made numerous false statements and omitted material facts regarding the conduct and communication described above and, in particular, lied about the extent, timing, and nature of his communications with the professor, the female Russian national, and the Russian MFA connection. False statement. Papadopoulos met the professor and learned about Russian dirt before he joined the campaign. During his interview with the FBI, defendant Papadopoulos acknowledged that he did meet with the professor, and the professor told him the Russians had dirt on candidate Clinton in the form of thousands of emails. But defendant stated multiple times that these communications occurred prior to when he joined the campaign. Defendant told the FBI, "This isn't like the professor's messaging me while I'm in April with Trump. I wasn't even on the Trump team. That wasn't even on the radar. I wasn't even on Trump's orbit at this time. This was a year ago. This was before I even got with Trump." He also said it was a very strange coincidence to be told of the dirt before he started working for the campaign. In truth and in fact, however, as set forth, defendant Papadopoulos met the professor for the first time on or about March 14, 2016, after defendant Papadopoulos had already learned he would be a foreign policy advisor for the campaign. He showed interest after the professor showed interest in him, and only after learning of his role on the campaign, and the professor told defendant about the Russians possessing dirt on then-candidate Clinton more than a month after defendant had joined the campaign. False statement. Papadopoulos' contacts with the professor were inconsequential. During his interview with the FBI, defendant Papadopoulos also made false statements in an effort to minimize the extent and importance of his communications with the professor. For example, defendant Papadopoulos stated that the professor's a nothing, that he has thought the professor was just a guy talking up connections or something, and that he believed the professor was BSing, to be completely honest with you. In truth and in fact, defendant Papadopoulos understood the professor to have substantial connections to high-level Russian government officials, and that the professor spoke with some of these officials in Moscow before telling defendant Papadopoulos about the dirt. Defendant Papadopoulos also engaged in extensive communication over a period of months with the professor regarding foreign policy issues for the campaign, including efforts to arrange a history-making meeting between the campaign and Russian government officials. In addition, defendant Papadopoulos failed to inform investigators that the professor had introduced him to the Russian MFA connection, despite being asked if he had met with Russian nationals or anyone with a Russian accent during the campaign. Indeed, while defendant Papadopoulos told the FBI that he was involved in meetings and did shuttle diplomacy with officials from several other countries during that campaign, he omitted the entire course of conduct with the professor and the Russian MFA connection regarding his efforts to establish meetings between the campaign and Russian government officials. False statement. Papadopoulos met the female Russian national before he joined the campaign, and his contacts with her were inconsequential. During his interview with the FBI, defendant Papadopoulos also falsely claimed that he met with the female Russian national before he joined the campaign, and falsely told the FBI that he had no relationship at all with the female Russian national. He stated that the extent of their communications was just sending her emails, just "Hi, how are you?" That's it. In truth and in fact, however, defendant Papadopoulos met the female Russian national on or about March 24, 2016, after he had joined the campaign. He believed that the female Russian national had connections to high-level Russian government officials and could help him arrange a potential foreign policy trip to Russia, and during the campaign he emailed and spoke over Skype on numerous occasions with the female Russian national about the potential foreign policy trip to Russia. Events following Papadopoulos' January 27th interview with FBI, 2017. The FBI interviewed defendant Papadopoulos again on February 16, 2017. His counsel was present for this interview. During the interview, defendant Papadopoulos reiterated his purported willingness to cooperate with the FBI's investigation. The next day, on or about February 17, 2017, defendant Papadopoulos deactivated his Facebook account, which he had maintained since approximately August of 2005, and which contained information about communications communications he had with the professor and the Russian MFA connection. Shortly after he deactivated his account, Papadopoulos created a new Facebook account that did not contain the communications with the professor and the Russian MFA connection. On or about February 23, 2017, defendant Papadopoulos ceased using his cell phone number and began using a new number. On or about July 27th, defendant Papadopoulos was arrested upon his arrival at Dulles International Airport. Following his arrest, defendant met with the government on numerous occasions to provide information and to answer questions. And this is signed by Robert S. Mueller, Special Counsel. The preceding statement is a summary made for the purposes of providing the court with a factual basis for my guilty plea in the charge against me. It does not include all of the facts known to me regarding this offense. I make this statement knowingly and voluntarily, and because I am, in fact, guilty of the crime charged. No threats have been made to me, nor am I under the influence of anything that could impede my ability to understand the statement of the offense fully. I have read every word of this statement of the offense, or have had it read to me. Pursuant to Federal Rule of Criminal Procedure 11, after consulting with my attorney, I agree and stipulate to this statement of the offense, and declare under penalty of perjury that it is true and correct. Dated October 5th, George Papadopoulos, defendant. His attorney further signs it as well. I have read this statement of the offense. I have read it with my client. I concur in my client's desire to adopt and stipulate to this statement as true and accurate. Holy mackerel. So there really was a female Russian national that campaign officials met with and attempted, or rather at least discussed, setting up a direct meeting between Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin, or other similar meetings that might not have contained Donald Trump. But I did see in there, and I've got to acknowledge everything, that it does not appear that the meeting actually took place. So, or at least not according to this stipulation. So that's two holy mackerels in one morning. Wow. Jeez. So what do you think of that? I really don't know what to think of it. I definitely have some thoughts, but this is a rather politically charged thing, so I'm going to keep this one factual. And I'm also not taking questions and not putting the chat up on my video feed. You may know why I'm not doing that, but that's why I was not doing that. So that's all we're going to cover with that today. Thank you very, very much for joining me. I'm going to go get some lunch. I haven't even gotten breakfast yet. I literally rolled out of bed, saw the first indictment and the arrest, or rather the voluntary turning himself in of Paul Manafort, and jumped on here on stream. And then at the end of that stream, somebody mentioned, hey, Papadopoulos pled guilty as well. So we jumped back onto stream. So this has been quite an exciting morning, even this whole past day, because yesterday we did a live stream as well, and that was a big day too. So this has been quite an exciting day for legal filings and things, and I am looking forward to finding out what the rest of the story is here. Whatever it is, I'm really not hoping that this is worse than it is. I would like this to not be too much terribly worse, but who knows how far this goes. We'll have to see as things progress. So thank you very much for joining me. I'm Leonard French, your favorite copyright attorney. I'd like to thank my Patreon sponsors. You may have heard that I've been getting demonetized left and right. Apparently my videos do not show up as ad-friendly anymore since YouTube updated their bot. And so just about all of my videos are getting flagged as non-monetizable. So I really, 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 really appreciate your support at this point. So far, my $50 plus supporters for the month of October are Joshua Meinsinger, John Steele, John Cripps, Nate Beck, Lydia Collinson, and Weston Loning. And I have my $5 plus supporters scrolling on the LED panel behind me, and I'm going to put them in the description of the archive video below. I have other supporters who are contributing at either less than $5 or they don't want to be recognized, and that's fine too. Anybody who contributes gets a special badge on, or special color and badge on my Discord channel, gets a special channel on my Discord channel, and I do some private live streams just for the Patreon patrons. Usually, right now, it's the pre-stream Sunday mornings at about 9:30 Eastern U.S. time. I'll jump on and we'll talk about the stories and kind of have a little bit of an informal moment. And there have been some special events, but I don't commit to a schedule or anything. So thank you to all of those supporters. Thank you for joining me, chat and viewers. You have all been very amazing to have you all interested in this reading of the law. Again, I'm Leonard French, your favorite copyright attorney. I'm going to conclude the stream here. We'll have the archive up, and I'll see you in my next video. I'm going to go play with some dogs and get some food, and yeah, I think get my day started here at noon Eastern. So thank you very much. Love you all. I'm Leonard French. Have a good one.